Hey guys, something I just did after our class today that I think you guys will really profit from as well is this. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back and read the paper one that you wrote in class. When you do it, first thing I want you to do is look for things that you did and you're looking at them now going, man, I wish I would have done that slightly different. So for example, on mine, we see in yellow that I did that here. And the reason I changed that, for example, is this. So I said increasing prices signals to suppliers to make more and to consumers to buy less, eventually leading to a new equilibrium. Well, before up here, I had been talking about excess demand right here. So I thought probably it would have been better if instead of saying it the way I did write it, if I had instead said eventually eliminating the excess demand, tying it back to that earlier thought. Okay, so I did that a few times if you look through my paper. I think what you would find even more significantly, so even in this zoomed out view, do you see all the green, right? There's so much of it, okay? Well, what I've done there is I've gone in and I've just highlighted any specific economic term. I haven't defined all those. I only defined the first couple of terms like we talked about. But I bet if you look at mine versus yours, you'll see that I've done that a lot more. And the reason for that, or what I'm doing in that, is I'm communicating my knowledge to the examiner. I'm saying, look, I understand all these economic ideas and I'm using them correctly. Next thing I want you to analyze, I want you to go in and again in blue, you will see that especially in paper 1A, I am referring to my diagram, almost constantly. In paper 1B, that's a little bit less, but maybe not very significantly. You see it does fall off towards the end because I'm focusing more on my evaluation at that point. Where I don't think I did a good job with this paper, but if you go compare it to the one that I did in the second class, which is just a few pages down on the OneNote, what I think I did better with the second class was using specific examples. So for example, in here, all I did, I talked about like in LEDCs, the tax can be hard to collect. That's really the only kind of specific thing I said in paper 1A. It's not a great question for that, but still, you'll see like in paper 1B, there were some more obvious things that I could have done. So, I talked about a specific thing about cigarettes, that they're addictive, and that's why they're, inelasticity, or that's why they're inelastic. But I also saw that I could have brought in, like here, it would have been very good for me to bring in some ideas that are specific. So they can use this revenue, I'm talking about the tax revenue from the indirect tax, to sponsor advertising, such as putting gruesome images on packaging as seen in Brazil and Canada. And that's, I know a lot of you wrote your IAs about a similar idea or something like that. I knew it. I didn't know Brazil. I was talking to another student that said that. But I knew in Canada they did that. And it would have been very good for me to have said that, but I didn't. Okay. Again, down here, I said, okay, or they could use the money to encourage more responsible behavior amongst smokers. And I didn't say anything about what that might be, where probably it would have been good for me to say, what I wrote there in purple. Now, of course, a caveat on that is that, I was rushing and it was getting to be the end of the time. And obviously that's a difficult thing to do. But looking back at it, it would have strengthened the quality of my response. Okay, so those are the three things I want you to highlight, and please do it in those colors so that we're all, we can look at each other's and figure it out pretty quickly. Okay, these next two parts are really important as well. So draw brackets around where you are analyzing and summarize your points. So looking at paper 1A, we'll just use it as the example. There, in brackets, what I'm analyzing is that the tax causes the supply curve to shift up. Next, in my essay, and again, you notice that I skipped a line and created a new paragraph, and that's something that you really should use. Just standard writing technique is to introduce a new thought in a new paragraph. So in this new paragraph, now my analysis is about that the supply curve is going, or that the shift of the supply curve is going to raise the price of cigarettes. You see how those two follow from each other. So I say, look, the supply curve is going to shift up, right? I prove that. Then I talk about since that's true, it's going to cause the price to increase also. The last analysis that I do is not as good, but on the other hand, it's more of a conclusion than analysis anyway. And I'm saying that that price going up is going to accomplish the two things for the government that the essay is about, which is it's going to limit consumption and it's going to raise revenue for the government to spend on other things. Okay, so that's what I'm doing there. I won't go through the exact same thing for paper 1B. It's much the same. The only other thing I do for paper 1B is that I do highlight, and I'm putting boxes around them, just doing like what you see in green here, the points that are kind of evaluation points. They're more important conclusions. They go beyond simple analysis. So for example, here I'm saying, okay, well, the government's trying to reduce the consumption through a tax, but because cigarettes are inelastic, that's not going to be totally successful. And again, I'm going to summarize over here what my point is. So it's an evaluation point. The tax doesn't work well in reducing the QT. And you see in this, if we go to the bottom of that, you know, I have about 5 or 6, actually it looks like 7, what I would call specific evaluation points. I talk about the government, I talk about third parties, I talk about third parties again, and then the last 2 I'm saying are actually synthesis because I'm making more of a conclusion from what I've said, as opposed to here I'm saying that if taxes are raised by indirect taxes on cigarettes, then non-smokers can actually pay lower taxes. Well, that's a judgment, right? It's not something that I'm bringing together from my earlier analysis. Here, though, I'm saying that basically the benefits to the third parties are going to take a while. So that's more bringing together other points I've already made. I did this between your class, or between the first class and the third class, and I found that in writing for the second class, that having done this exercise right here was very beneficial. So once you go look at, and I'll go ahead and post it for the second class as well, the second essay I wrote, maybe you'll see, look, it's very good questions, who knows, but maybe you'll see some differences in that. I really think if you do this, it'll have a positive impact on how you write. One last thing I do want you to do is to go ahead and look at a few other people's, not mine, but look at your classmates. And I want you to just come up with 5 things that someone else did differently, better than you, and just comment what you liked about it. Lorenzo wasn't here today, so he makes a good example. We might say, okay, well, Lorenzo's diagrams were more clear because he didn't try to put everything on them. So you're just pointing out by looking at somebody else's, maybe something that you would prefer to have done.